and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jamie, and today we are recounting my journey of reading all 4 of the Walking Dead compendium novels. Yes, these absolutely massive compendium volumes of the entire Walking Dead series. I read this series over the course of 1 year. So the entirety of 2023, I read or attempted to read 1 volume per quarter, and it has been a massive undertaking, but I will let you see how it went. And as this video is already super long, I'm gonna stop talking right now and let's just get right into it. Hey, hi, hello. It is currently February 23rd, 2023. I know that this is going to be a very long video over the course of a long time. So try to update the dates that we're talking about. Let's talk about The Walking Dead Compendium 1. I am halfway through, which means that I have read chapters 1 through 4, and there are 8 chapters per compendium. And it says on the back that it's issues 1 through 48, although in the chapters it's not broken down by issues, so I'm not really sure like exactly what constitutes an issue. Like, it's just broken down into chapters. And I actually was like going to update earlier, but I think because of the size of these huge compendium books, I'm just gonna update at the halfway and at the end of each book to just keep this a little bit more concise. Okay, so The Walking Dead. I started reading this in, I don't know, January, maybe early February. I read chapter 1, and chapter 1 is pretty much almost exactly the same as the pilot episode of the TV show. And for reference, I did watch the TV show I guess it was my freshman year in college, and at that time the show was like well into its run. I think I actually remember watching the Negan episode, during my sophomore year of college. So so the show had been on for quite a long time at that point, but I just got into it my freshman year of college, which was in 2015, and I was so enamored with it. Like, I absolutely loved it. Like, from the very first minute, I was obsessed. And so it has taken me a long time to decide to read the comics, but I really want to go back to the source material, and I was interested to see in how things would be different, because throughout watching the show, I would kind of hear that things would be changed and that there were like different characters would be given different deaths and stuff like that. So I was interested, I was excited. And then when I read the first chapter of this one, I was like, oh, that like played out exactly like it did in the show. So I was like, this might be kind of hard, like just watching so much of the same stuff happen. But very quickly things diverged. I think one of the most like shocking things for me reading the first half of this, the first 4 chapters, is the pacing in the books just feels so different from the show. In the comics, there will be like weeks and months that will go by within a single chapter, and just things will like be like elongated, I guess, like just actions will take longer. And in the show, I felt like we were always doing something within the course of like a single day. And in this, there's like weeks in between things. And sometimes it's just like a break, like in the middle of a chapter, it'll be like, oh yeah, remember we did that thing last week, so that was just a little bit jarring to me. And I was really surprised at the passage of time and just how quickly that was happening in the comics. Also, I'm pretty shocked at the quite dramatic changes to character in the comics, even this early on. I knew that later in the series, a lot of the characters changed, or there was things added specifically for the show and this and that. Like, I did know that things would change, but I didn't realize how early the changes started. Basically, after chapter 1. Chapter 1 is like exactly like it happens in the show. And then after that, things are very, very different. And I'm not going to lie, I like the changes that the show's made to this. And maybe it's just because I saw the show first. I really, really love it. But the changes that the show makes, I think, were vast improvements to the story. I really thought that the show kind of was really picking out the themes that the book, I'm going to call it book, okay, that the book was trying to go for, but maybe did not hit all the time. I think that the changes that the show made to the characters is very, very smart. I think like the characters in the book, they actually get a little bit muddled. Like, aside from Rick, our main character, Rick Grimes, he really gets the most characterization, but everybody else kind of just like, aside from like a couple characters, like Herschel gets a little bit of characterization, but like a lot of other characters just don't get that much attention to who they actually are as people. And it's odd, like it's very hard to differentiate between some characters, especially, well, no, not especially, but like the women. Sometimes I have a hard time differentiating between them, which, I mean, I'll get into that in a minute. But I have issues differentiating between the men too. There's a character called Otis in here, and like every time he shows up, it takes me forever to remember who he is and like where he came from and like what is going on with him. But yeah, there's just like a lot of characters just don't get that much characterization. We don't see too many like differing opinions except for one specific instance. And which, again, really the point of that was to give Rick more of a characterization. So I think the show did a better job in that regard. And then the characters that were actually written for the show, like Daryl and T-Dog in season 1 and Merle, and some changes to some of the characters are like still there, but they're like drastically different characters in the show. I think those additions were extremely like smart, needed, and I really liked them. Obviously, it's hard to have The Walking Dead without Daryl. I'm almost like, it's hard to talk about this without really giving spoilers. Here's the thing. This series has been around forever. Like, if you were interested in being a part of the world, I think you would have done so by now. But I do think, so I'll say this, like, tiny, tiny little spoiler, but the character of Daryl is actually taken from a character of Tyrese, I guess. Not one-to-one by any means, but the role of Daryl in the comics, at least up to now, is being filled by the character of Tyrese, which if I remember correctly, it's very possible that I'm not remembering correctly because it has been a long time since I watched the show, and I binged watched the show, and like, so my memory could be a little bit foggy. It's been a couple years. But if I'm remembering correctly, when we actually meet Tyrese in the show, he is one of the members of the prison. So, but when I read about the actual members of the prison, that seems like kind of disrespectful to Tyrese to give him that character. I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen the show, honestly. I can't remember what happened to poor dear Tyrese, but I was kind of like, when I read that, I was like, it feels kind of mean to Tyrese to do that. Okay, I'm rambling. I at first was kind of not sure I was going to like this, and like, literally me, I don't read series. I'm so bad at finishing series, mostly because I read the first one and I'm like, yeah, that was fun, and then I like rarely like the next ones. So at first I was like, I just really committed. I bought all 4 of these books, and the beginning was kind of boring, but then some things did pick up, and there were definitely a couple moments that like my jaw was on the floor, because I don't think those moments were in the show. I would certainly remember if they were in the show, and there was one moment in the first 4 chapters that I was just like, what? But I actually think the show adds a lot of action. There's not as many zombies in here as you would think, and the show adds even more action. I know a lot of people like harp on the second season of the show because it takes place at the farm, and they're like, oh, they're just standing around the farm, nothing happens. That was an exciting season of television compared to what actually happens in the book, which is to say, not a lot. There was a lot of times when like character deaths would happen at times that I was not expecting, or just like they didn't align with when they happened in the show. So at least, you know, there's lots of elements of surprise in here because, yeah, the timing of the deaths are very just sporadic. Anything could happen anytime, which is a lot of fun. Some issues that I'm having right now, Robert Kirkman, okay, he's a man. He's a man. He's a white man. And I feel like I don't think that this book handles some things super well. I don't like how the women are written or treated up at this point. And I know that like in the show it was like a thing that like the women, a lot of them had character arcs of being like these like soft, like, you know, helpless creatures, and then turning into like total badass women. And that was kind of like a big point of the show. And here it's like we're not even going that far. Like they're actually getting even less, except for like there's like tiny morsels of when we give women a chance to be characters. But in general, I think that is kind of a weaker element of this. And like, in a way, I'm not surprised. Like, I am not surprised. I knew going into this that this was like a very like bro comic. But the show is not, actually. The show, I think, has like a lot of really great female characters. And that's why it was one of my favorite shows. I mean, it was just, I think the show did such a good job creating a more representative story. And then with that being said, we also have to talk about the representation of Black people in this story. Okay. When I was in college, I took a class that was based on apocalyptic fiction. And one of the things that I was really interested in was how The Walking Dead, the TV show, portrayed race. It was interesting to me because there is this scene very early on, like in season 1, of T-Dog, who's a Black man, and Merle, who is a white racist asshole. But Merle, what a character. They are on top of the roof, like this roof in Atlanta, and I can't remember now exactly how it happens, but Merle gets handcuffed to like a bar on the top of the roof, and T-Dog has the key. And it's this whole thing between them because Merle was being like a racist asshole to T-Dog, and now T-Dog has the key to like literally save his life. T-Dog has the choice if he's gonna let this man like die up on this roof or if he's gonna save him. And that storyline, that's just like one example. This actually happens quite a bit throughout the show. There's just a lot of discussion about race and race relationships, and how it's interesting that even though the world was literally falling apart and they were like had this dichotomy of like us versus them, the literal monsters trying to eat them, that race was still playing a role in their choices. And I was just really interested in that concept, and I thought that the TV show did such a good job, and it was kind of something that I had never really like seen in media before, because at that time I actually, like, when I had watched Walking Dead, I had not been exposed to much apocalyptic fiction, except for like Hunger Games, I guess. I don't know, that doesn't even count. But now I have read a ton of apocalyptic fiction, and I still think it is so interesting when race and kind of gender roles and things like that are brought up in apocalyptic fiction. All that is to say, the book does not handle it that well, or I know it's not actually trying. It's a lot of the times it's trying to kind of be a raceless story, except for a couple moments when characters will bring up like an element of race, or more specifically, characters will be racist. They will just be racist. And I'm definitely a person who believes that you can write a racist character without believing in what that character believes, if you're writing that character to make a point or to just, I guess, be representative of the thoughts that are existent in the world. But the problem is that, at least so far, when I'm halfway through the first book, those views are not necessarily challenged. So it's kind of hard to kind of like wrap around exactly what the purpose of that is doing in this story. This does take place in Atlanta. It takes place, in Georgia. It's in the South. So, like, yes, there are racist people that exist. But the thing is that it doesn't actually do anything in the sense of the story of, like, we're going to talk about race in any way. Like, it's really just, it just is there, and you as the reader just have to, like, just have that knowledge now that this character is, like, super racist. And like I said, it doesn't actually challenge it. So if you were a person who was reading this and you had the same beliefs, it would not come across as critical, which I think is kind of bad. So those two things are not great at the moment. But the other thing I guess that I was surprised about in this book is that there's quite a lot of melodrama. Like, there is a lot of talks of, like, relationships between people, and there's honestly quite a lot of sex, which, like, why am I surprised? Because this is, like, kind of a bro comic, like a really, like, manly comic written by a man. So I guess I can't be that surprised, but in the show, I did not feel like there was so much melodrama. At times there was, like, a little bit to, keep it interesting, but this really is, there is quite a lot of discussion of the interpersonal relationships, and honestly, there's more of that than there is, like, straight up violence. Although there's violence, there are scenes in here that were more violent than the TV show, aside from that one scene that we all know. But there's a lot more very, like, specific kinds of violence in this book, whereas the TV show pretty much just sticks to slaying zombies. Okay, well, that's all the thoughts that I have right now. I did kind of start to enjoy it. At first, I was worried. I was like, oh no, did I really commit myself to this? And I'm not even sure if this is, like, something that I like, because it turns out I just really like the TV show, and this is not necessarily a one-to-one comparison, or I should say it's not a one-to-one adaptation is what I mean. But it did kind of start to suck me in, and then I was kind of like, okay, wait, I'm interested. So very close to being done with the first one. I promise my next update won't be quite so long. I just had to get all of my thoughts out, my initial thoughts. But yeah, I'm starting to get interested, although chapter 4 was, like, a little bit slow. So we're gonna need to pick up the action here. So I'm gonna go finish this, and I will update you when I'm done. Ooh. Oof. Oh my gosh. Okay. Oof, gotta pour one out for my people in this book. I have just finished The Walking Dead Compendium 1, And I'm not gonna lie to you, that ending was brutal. It was brutal. Wow. What do I even want to say about this? Okay. Well, first of all, this is so much more brutal than the TV show. Like, the TV show is tame compared to this. This is not for the faint of heart. It's gruesome. Bad things happen to people. It's rough. It's rough all around. How do I feel about this? I think I actually give this 4 stars. I think the storytelling is very engaging. I think the plot moves pretty quickly. There's, not a ton of downtime. There's always something going on. And especially the end of this, chapter 8, that was a lot more intense than I expected it to be. Like I said, much more brutal and intense than the TV show version of what happens. I'm trying to keep this pretty spoiler free, but yeah, there's just a lot more violence. It does make sense from a storytelling perspective, and I think that the characters and everything makes sense in the setting, and it's good storytelling, it's solid writing. However, a couple things keep it from getting that 5 stars, and that is the fact that the characters are pretty one note most of the time, other than Rick. Rick is the only one who gets any love and attention from the writers. Pretty much everybody else is very one note, and especially the women. Listen, Robert Kirkman, he cannot write women. At least I haven't seen him do a good job of it yet. The only female character who I think gets something to do, something to say is Andrea. And I like her. She's cool. Michonne, obviously a badass. Michonne is great, but Michonne is one note. And in the show, she does start out as kind of one note and then she does develop. I get that, but it's just the fact that there are so many women who don't get much characterization at all. It doesn't feel different that Michonne doesn't, it doesn't feel like, oh, she's this stoic person who's not going to get a lot of attention. My issue is that the women in here are strictly used as sexual objects, with the small exception of Andrea and Michonne to a degree. Both of them have something to actually do. They're actually skilled in combat. But even they are largely just sexual objects most of the time. And the other women are just not even characters. Their voices don't sound any different. They don't have any distinct personalities. The character of Carol is vastly different in the book to the show, and the show version is far, far, far superior. Carol ends up being, a fan favorite, goes through a lot of development, and the same cannot be said for book Carol. I don't know what was going on there. And the thing is that there could have been something interesting to say with Carol and in the direction that her story takes, but I don't really think that Robert Kirkman was actually interested in it or just capable of telling that story. So the result was just a very muddled, confusing character that I just wasn't expecting that based on the Carol that we get in the show. So yeah, that's kind of rough. And Lori, same situation. She gets about one personality trait, just one, and that's just her whole thing. And it's not the men are much better. That's the thing. The men are not actually much better. It's not that the men get all this character development. It's just the women. The characters are very one note throughout, with the exception of Rick. Rick gets to have development and nobody else. And that being said, I understand that this is a small fraction of the entirety of the story. The other ones, you can't even see. They're right there. Wow. Right there. Yeah. So there's like 3 more massive books, so I get that character development can happen. But there were opportunities, you know? But overall, like, once I got past that, once I realized that, like, this is just how Robert Kirkman is going to write this is just how this is going to be, once I accepted it and just, like, tried to focus on the good things that the story did, then I was having a good time. And I will say, for as big as this is, I read it, like, I think in, like, a week. It looks a lot larger than it is, obviously due to its nature, being a comic, a graphic novel, but also, like, it is super bingeable. Like, I found myself wanting to pick it back up, wanting to see what happens next. You know, even having watched the show, even though I knew the general direction, a lot of things are different. A lot of people get very different deaths. A lot of storylines are either not there or completely changed, like, to the point that they're almost not even the same story. So I did find myself, like, I wanted to keep going, which is great. I wasn't bored. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with the way this went, even though that ending was sad. And that's what I think I would say about this. There are certainly sad moments in the show, but I don't remember it being, like, an overall sad experience. Like, I don't really know, like, this is just so grim. It really is. It's, like, very just sad. Like, it's gonna break your heart. And that's what they were going for. It succeeded. I did kind of feel myself being like, ooh, that's rough. So there we go. 4 stars for the first one. It was a good time and also a really bad time. Like, I recommend it, but only if you are, like, just okay with very brutal situations and many character deaths. But you already knew that. I will see you next time when I start the next book, which I don't know when that's going to be. Today is currently March 1st, so I did complete my goal of reading the first one within the first quarter of the year. It's been months. It's been months since I've updated you for this vlog. And I wish I had, like, a better excuse, but the fact is I just haven't read this in the time that I said I was going to. I have already failed one book into the process. I've already failed to do what I said I was going to do when I said I was going to read one of these per quarter. So, okay, well, the good news is I am reading it and I'm pretty close to the end. I was actually going to update you halfway, but that also didn't happen. My calendar back there still says June, so I could lie. I could totally lie right now and be like, it's June right now, I'm reading the second one, but I won't lie to you. It's August. It is August. So it's actually, yeah, we're into Q3 now, which means that I have to finish this one, which I will. I'm very close to the end. And then read Compendium 3 next month in order to be back on track. At the end of the day, I am reading it, and that is what's important. So yeah, this will be my halfway update, and just kind of like what I'm thinking about the second one. So we started the second one off on, the end of Compendium 1 was a big, I don't know if I would say like cliffhanger exactly, but like something really big happens at the end of the first one. So you go into this one kind of being like, okay, like, you know, what are our heroes going to do about this situation? It's off to a rough, like, note for our main characters when we start this. And I'll say I'm having such a difficult time being objective about these books because I love the TV show so much, and it's so hard not to compare the TV show to the comics, and like, just it's hard not to like have, you know, feelings about the characters that originate from my love of the TV show. It's hard to judge them based on who they are in the book, which, similar to what I said with, you know, Compendium 1, is that the characters, aside from Rick Grimes, are really not super developed, and they're not, You know, I wouldn't say that like as they exist in this form, I wouldn't say that they're like characters I really, really love. Whereas in the show, you know, I love them because I loved who they were in the show, which were admittedly very, very different from who they are here. Aside from Rick Grimes, not a lot of characters get a ton of depth or exploration. Not to say that there's none, because there is some. It's just like typically what they will do is be like, this character believes this and has this like personality type, and that's kind of the end of it. They won't, I wouldn't say that they're really like growing a ton or changing, again, apart from Rick Grimes. So, you know, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. Like, I don't actively dislike any of the characters except for the ones that I'm supposed to not like. So it's fine. I just like, they're just not super developed, I don't think. They're just very one note. Which, but like, again, like, that's not true of the show. And also the pacing is quite different. Like, I was very surprised that in Compendium 2, first of all, there's no Terminus. So that's crazy. Terminus was such a big thing in the show. The start of it does get brought up, but like it's not a whole thing. And then immediately into this book, we're already at Alexandria, which, while it kind of has like a fun introduction element, but like if I was reading this for the first time with no concept of the show, I'm not gonna lie, I think I'd be a little bit bored. I'd be like, what is this? Like, we had one book of real stuff and now we're like in Alexandria, and like I'm, you know, a little over halfway of this book and I'm kind of like, I'm already done with Alexandria. And again, it's hard for me to be objective because Alexandria was not my favorite plot in the show. And like, intrigue wise, I don't know why it would be really anybody's favorite. Like, who would enjoy Alexandria out of all the other things that happened? Who would enjoy Alexandria the most? So that is a bit difficult. But I'm surprised that it comes up this early, because in the show, there was like 2 or 3 seasons in between them leaving the prison, which happened at the end of Compendium 1, and when they get to Alexandria. So I was shocked at that. Sorry if the camera angle changed right there. I had to take a phone call. My phone started ringing. Okay, what was I saying? Halfway through this second one, Alexandria does nothing for me. I'm upset about the lack of Terminus, although maybe it comes in later and they just like moved when Terminus was. I think mostly I'm quite shocked at how much the show slows down all the pacings and things. And I know that like season 2 of Walking Dead gets a lot of hate for just being like them walking around a farm for a whole season, but the tension was so high still. I never had a problem with them. Like, I never felt like that season was lacking intrigue or danger or anything like that. The season that I did feel was lacking that was the Alexandria season. So it's just interesting that like the show was like, let's put that off for as long as possible. And actually I feel like putting it off longer did hit harder almost, because the whole thing about Alexandria, the thing that makes it interesting, and again, if you don't want any plot details in this, you just want like a straight review of how good things are, you don't have to listen to this part, but the one I think that like the thing that makes Alexandria so interesting is that they get to it in the show and in the book, but like in the show they get to it and it's like this little town that's walled off, and the town has not faced a lot of problems. Like, they've obviously like lost some people, and obviously they had a rough go of it at, you know, the beginning of the end of the world, but they've been living in their walled off community. They haven't had the walkers attack, really. They haven't had outsiders attack. Like, it's been relatively peaceful, as peaceful as it can be in the midst of a zombie apocalypse, but it's been peaceful. And when Rick and his group get to Alexandria, they are kind of like chilled to their core about how like how relaxed these people are and how they're kind of just going about their lives as if nothing ever happened. And it's really hard for Rick's group to adjust to that because they have just seen horrors beyond like what's fathomable to these people. So I think that that's very, very interesting how Rick's group is just not able to, you know, relax in this setting, even though that was the thing that they wanted. Like, they wanted to find a community that was safe and where they didn't have to be, you know, living in fear, but it's just impossible for them. And I think that's a really interesting discussion. And the book definitely does touch on that. It does, but also it gets so quickly to the kind of, you know, culmination of that thought, which is like, it was a false sense of security. It was never going to last. They were inevitably going to have a situation. And if you are so, you know, relaxed and secure, you're vulnerable. And it's just like the book comes to that so quickly. And I felt like the show did kind of a good job of really digging through all of those different mental elements that the characters were going through. Like I said, it's very hard for me to judge the books just objectively because it's just so much of the story. And like my interpretation of even reading this book is because of the themes and stuff that were dealt with in the show. Like, this feels like reading an abridged version of the story, which is funny because obviously this came first. So I don't know. That's where I'm going to end my thoughts for now. I do assume that something crazy is going to happen in the last, you know, last quarter of this book. And I'll be really interested because in the next two, I think because we've seen the stuff that the show dealt with, and I stopped watching the show towards the end of the Alexandria arcs, so you didn't even really see what came after that. After all the Negan stuff is when I stopped watching the show. So I think when in Compendiums 3 and 4, I will be dealing with a lot of new stuff that the show did not cover, or I just didn't see it, but I also think the show didn't cover it. And I think that's going to be where this really, you know, turns around for me. I'm still really enjoying it. I'm having a great time reading them. They're so easy to read and just like, I just keep wanting to pick it up. I'm having a great time. But as of right now, the show is far superior in my opinion. Okay, well, I have done it. I have completed The Walking Dead Compendium 2, which are the whole thing is issues 49 to 96. So, well, that's interesting because it is kind of difficult when you're reading the compendium to get a sense of like how many issues it is, and it's not quite 50, but it's close. I don't feel like this one has the amount of tension that the first one does. Like the first one is brutal. It's brutal, it's tense, it's gory. The action just keeps on coming, and I really liked the first one. And this one I did not care for as much just because I don't and have never cared for the Alexandria arc. In the show, didn't care for it. Here, didn't care for it. And I really didn't realize how much of this compendium would be Alexandria. In fact, due to it, you know, taking so much longer to get to Alexandria in the show, I did not anticipate that we would be in Alexandria already. That being said, if it was released, like if I was reading them as they were being released, this might have more tension because there are some big moments in here. It's just that for the most part, the Alexandria arc stays like very close, or the show stays very close to the Alexandria arc. So not a ton of surprises in here for me, which just made it a bit dull. I would be very curious though, like if someone had not seen the show and they were reading just the compendiums or like just the comics, like would this compendium hold their attention? Would this compendium like encourage them to keep reading, basically, because I don't know, I just felt this one was dull. Alexandria is super boring to me, but I also didn't realize how big of just like a plot it was, how essential to the core of The Walking Dead that Alexandria is, because it felt like by the time the show got to it, it felt like the show was kind of running out of gas. So to think that actually at that point they're pulling from one of the longest and most intricate arcs is actually really crazy to me. What I did like about this one compared to the first one is that the women get a lot more character development. I mean, compared to the first one, which is really not a high bar to clear. So like, I mean, they're still not super well developed, but definitely more. So hopefully we just keep going up from here. And certainly compared to the show, no, like no. One big disappointment that I have is like Maggie in the show is a much stronger character. In this, Maggie is like barely a person. I do hope that changes in the future, but as of right now, Maggie is like really, she does have some moments, but they're few and far between. Andrea does get some development. I do appreciate that. But again, it's just so slight in comparison to the men and specifically Rick. Another thing that I really enjoyed about this compendium was that it really got into Rick's mental headspace and just how just genuinely messed up of a person he is because of this whole entire situation. And I really appreciated that they did take the time to go through what Rick is feeling, and it's complicated. Like, Rick has to go through a ton of iterations of grief and sadness and rediscovery, and just like he's just in a bad place for the majority of this book for obvious reasons. But I really appreciated how it wasn't just like a one-time thing where they're like, okay, we talked about this thing and then, you know, now he's done with it. Like, it is continual, and he continues to have problems, and he thinks that he's like, okay, I've worked through this, but it comes back. And I really appreciate that because I wasn't necessarily expecting this to do that. So that was really nice to see. And also, this kind of does get into some territory of dealing with the toxic masculinity that I feel like is very prevalent, especially in the first compendium. But this really gets at it. And, you know, considering that, especially at the time of these comics being written, the target audience would have been a male demographic, I feel like this book does do a lot in the way of like working through the idea that like strong men like can't, you know, feel scared or can't feel something, or like have to put on this like layer of toughness, like, and what it means to be strong, and like what it means to like be brave. Like, all of these things are really challenged in this, and I really appreciate that because, again, I didn't necessarily expect that, especially after reading the first one. I was like, oh, we're really not gonna get anything in the way of those kind of discussions. So I am really happy to see that the writers of this comic, Robert Kirkman, is he the only writer? I should know that. No, it doesn't seem that that's true. Charlie Adlard and Cliff Rathburn are also credited as writers. Yeah, so like I said, I'd be interested to see how someone who had never watched the show react to this specific Alexandria arc, because unfortunately I found it dull. But is that because I already knew what was going to happen? I already knew where things were going to go? I'm not sure. I'm going to try to get my friend who has never seen Walking Dead to read these, because they are still fun. Like, they are good. Like, they're good, you know? They're fun to read, and I feel like if you didn't know what was going to happen, I just can imagine this would be a really fun experience. But the Alexandria arc does drag, in my opinion. Hello, it is October 4th, and I am just starting The Walking Dead Compendium 3. I know, I'm really late. I was supposed to finish Compendium 3 by the end of September, and I didn't even start it. I honestly could not remember what happened at the end of 2, so I had to go back into Compendium 2 and just look at what happened at the end. And they had just gone to Hilltop and learned about the Saviors, which is, of course, ruled by Negan. So that's where we were at. I just started it, and this one, it kicks off with a bang. It really does. Not very far in, and we've already had a major death, and it seems like they've just met Negan, and we all know what happens when they meet Negan. So I don't know if I'm ready for that. I honestly did not expect this to happen until like halfway through this book. So the fact that it's happened so quickly, I just don't know what else could be in these pages, to be honest. I thought this entire book was going to be the Negan thing. So we'll see. I don't know if I'm prepared. I'm honestly not prepared. Yeah, I just read the Negan moment. The Negan moment. You all know the one. We all know the one. Oh, jeez. Like, even if you didn't watch the show or didn't make it that far, or, you know, whatever the situation was, didn't read the comics, like, it was such a big moment in the cultural zeitgeist. Everybody knew what happened when Negan came on The Walking Dead. Zuko. He's also upset. He knew what happened. He wasn't even born yet, but he knew what happened. I think I'm just very shocked at how actually, like, genuinely effective the tension was. I mean, obviously the show builds up a lot of anticipation for Negan's arrival, and the comics do too, but it definitely moves a lot faster in here versus than it did in the show. But still, the moment leading up to his reveal is very well done, and you really feel the tension when you meet him, and he's just terrifying. He's absolutely terrifying, and this scene is brutal. Like, it's even brutal in the book. I just can't imagine, like, reading it in real time and not knowing what was going to happen. And, like, just experiencing that shock in real time and the horror of it. Yeah, it's brutal. It's brutal. But a very well done scene. And I think that, like, the emotions that Rick experiences are well done too. So it's easy to understand why Negan is such a memorable villain, because the scene is just, like, unforgettable. It is so brutal. No matter which form you see it in for the first time, whether it was via the comics or via the show, it's a rough one. It is a really, really rough one. With all that being said, like, there is a lot more left in the book. There's a lot more left. So I don't really know, like, where it can go from here. I was not expecting this scene to happen so early in this book, and this is the longest book. So from here on out, I pretty much don't know what's going to happen, because this was the scene that I stopped watching the show in. So this is where I, like, basically stopped. I mean, I did end up finishing the rest of that season, but honestly, like, I just don't remember anything else after that moment. It really was the moment that, like, I was just like, all right, I'm done. That there's nothing more that can be done with this show. Like, this insane thing just happened. And I don't know. There's, like, a big discussion as to why so many people stopped watching at that precise moment. It is very, like, odd psychological thing, because they gave us exactly what we asked for. Like, they did deliver with the show and with that scene, and, like, you know, it was well done. And still, it was the reason that a lot of people stopped watching the show, and me as well. And it wasn't because, like, oh, we didn't like how the scene was done. It was just like, I don't know, your emotion reached such a peak in that moment. And for me, it was like, I wasn't gonna feel the emotional highs and lows. Like, nothing could beat that. So I was just kind of like, all right, I'm done. I don't know, very weird thing. I still to this day like think about like why I left watching that show, because I loved it so much. And it was just a really, really odd thing. So all of that is to say that, like, for the next 2 books, I really don't know what's going to happen. I don't know the big plot points. I don't know much of anything, really. Like, all of this material is going to be new to me, which is very, very, very exciting. And yeah, I do want to see how this gets resolved, unlike in the show where I was just like, that sucks. That's rough. I don't know. I do feel like the comics have the room to be more brutal. So I'll be interested to see how they resolve it. And then now I'm really interested for Compendium 4, because I just like can't imagine what would be in there. That's my update for today. I think I'll just go to bed now. Wanted to go ahead and give an update. I'm about 25% into Walking Dead Compendium 3, and I'm loving it so far. Like, I think this is one of the most interesting books, I guess, besides maybe the first one. But I feel like this book is so engaging. I won't lie, I was kind of struggling with book 2, but, well, I don't know, the governor was in that one, so I guess that was good. But this is very engaging right off the bat. I think, like, Negan is he's just such a good villain and such a good character. He is truly so unpredictable. Like, sometimes I mean, obviously, he's very sadistic, and he comes up with, like, crazy, insane, awful punishments, and, like, he is a bad guy, like, to his core. But he's also kind of reasonable at times. Like, I mean, reasonable in the context of this very unreasonable world, but, like, he doesn't just go around killing people all the time, to the point that, like, he does build trust with the communities that he's forcing to support him. But I don't know, it's an interesting character. And I think, like, he does have such a strong personality, and he does have such a recognizable personality, and you just never know what he's gonna do, and that is truly what makes him terrifying. You don't know if he's gonna hurt our heroes. You don't know if he's gonna, you just don't know from one day to the next how he's gonna act, and I think that is what just makes him so exciting. Like, the governor was just, like, pure evil at all times, and that is definitely scary, but Negan is he's just on another level. And I'm really enjoying him. And I'm enjoying all the kind of philosophical discussions that Rick and his people are having of, like, is it better to just cooperate and do what they ask? Or, is it better to try to go against him? And both options have their pros and cons. So I'm enjoying those conversations. I'm also enjoying that Jesus in this. If you've never read or seen The Walking Dead, that's probably a weird thing to say. The character of Jesus, who I enjoyed on the show, I actually really like him in the books, because he's this, like, guide to all of the communities. And I just think that's a fun role for him. I really like how he ties all the communities together. And I believe he did that in the show, but I just feel like it comes through stronger because really he has, like, less to do in the books. I think that's the thing. Like, in the show, all the characters have so much more to do, or they're all, like, doing different things all the time, and their roles, like, shift. But in the books, each character pretty much only has one role, and I mean, I've said this before about the other books, like the characters are kind of like one note, maybe aside from Rick, but otherwise, like everyone's very one note. They're very much like in a box of this is what this person does, and they very rarely stray from that. And like, that is not great. Like, if you think about like, oh, what I like in a story, you would think that that wouldn't make sense. But the fact is that there are so many characters that like it can get complicated to follow if there's not more clear like definitions of who these characters are. So I don't know, like on the one hand, it does make them one note, but on the other hand, it makes it very easy to recognize their role in the story. So I am liking Jesus's character for that, and I just think he's a nice guy, you know. And at the 25% mark, we have just met Ezekiel. And I mean, I of course met Ezekiel through the show, but again, this is one of those times where I'm like, dang, if you were reading this like live in real time, like the shock of that introduction, like, I mean, of course, like in the show, we were all shocked too, but like just seeing that for the first time in the books is just like so fun, and he's so cool. Already a big fan of Ezekiel, and I've only seen him for 5 seconds. Yeah. So I'm really enjoying this a lot. Of course, the one thing that I'll say is Maggie is just sidelined. And I understand that she just went through a lot with the Negan part, but we don't even cut back to her. We don't see her at all. She basically just drops off, and she was a big character. So, and it's kind of same thing, like Andrea is in it definitely, but she just does not seem to have a ton to do. And like this, now I'm like very conflicted because our favorite characters like don't get a ton of screen time because there's just too much going on. Like, Negan is completely taking over this book. Like, he is getting so much more attention than any other character, much more than the governor. Oh, Carl. I haven't really talked about Carl. I actually think, aside from Rick, Carl is a character that gets some pretty thorough development, and I am enjoying Carl's arc. So, pros there. I wish the women got treated better. I wish that one woman would get a character arc, you know what I mean? But it is what it is. I'm continuing on. I'm having a good time with this. I will update you later. Oh my god. Okay. I just finished Walking Dead Compendium 3, and am I gonna give this 5 stars? Like, I think I am. I think I'm giving this 5 stars. That ending. Whew. Okay. Yeah, I'm giving this 5 stars. This was easily the most entertaining of all the books that I've read so far. Although I will say, like, had I not known so much of what was going to happen, I think book 1 probably would have still been my favorite. Like, book 1 is good, okay? Book 1's good. But I did know so much of what was going to happen. So, like, it just wasn't as much of a surprise for me. Whereas this one was full of new things. I've already, mentioned about the Negan stuff, but when I stopped watching the show, I had seen just like the beginnings of the Whisperers, but I didn't know anything about them really. I just kind of seen their little stick, but I hadn't actually met any of them. So meeting them, that ending, wow. I think this book does a lot of things to improve on some of my issues with the previous ones. And I even mentioned earlier in when I was talking about this book, I was like, oh, it would be nice if like one woman got any kind of character development. And I'm happy to say that the women do really step it up in this book. They get a lot of attention. They get a lot of development. I absolutely love what is going on with Maggie in the second half of this book. I think the philosophical conflict that she has to deal with is so interesting, and it's honestly so well done. And you know, after the Negan arc, I was kind of just like, where are we taking this? Like, where can this go? Which is the exact same way I felt about the show. But seeing what Maggie deals with in the aftermath of the Negan arc, it's clever. It's clever. I'm here for it. I had a great time reading this entire thing. And I know I haven't really like touched on it before, but even though these books like look super long, they don't take that long to read. They do read quickly. It took me about like four-ish days to finish this. So the same, amount of time as a regular book. One critique that I do have about this book in particular, it just feels like this book more so than the previous two books, is that kind of in a similar vein as to what happened in the show with like our main cast of characters getting some major plot armor. I feel like that is happening here as well, because is this an unpopular opinion, but I kind of wish, like, this is gonna sound ridiculous, I kind of wish more people would have died in the war with Negan. I just do. I just feel like, if you're gonna say that the stakes are that high, I feel like you actually have to like do something with that. And we're definitely to the point where, this exactly how this happens in the show is like characters are introduced for them to be killed off not that long from now. That is something that was getting annoying in the show, and it's happening here. Like, the end of this book is wild. Like, the end, I'm happy with the end. It's a big shock value. Ends on a big cliffhanger like they all do. But honestly, there were a couple characters in here that I was like, would it have been awful if they would have died in this situation? Yes, but that would have given that punch that we really need, because we're doing the exact same thing. Because some of the characters just have plot armor, and I think like if you're gonna do that, if you're gonna do this like big cliffhanger ending, like I wanted like a couple major character deaths. There are some, obviously people die. There are some big ones. But regardless though, this one has been the best one so far. Again, if I didn't know as much going into the other two, like they probably would have rated higher, but for me, this one, like Negan is just such a dang good character. He's just so unpredictable and so crazy and so terrifying. Like, it's horrible to say, I love Negan. I love him as a character. He really brings the spice, he brings the chaos, and that is what I'm here for. So yeah, Negan, the whole Negan arc was great. Even what the stuff that happens after Negan is really great, which is shocking to me. But this one, I was really impressed with it. I will talk to you when I start the next and final book in the series. Well, everyone, with mere hours left to spare, the sun is literally setting on my day, on the year of 2023. I have just completed The Walking Dead Compendium 4, and therefore completing my goal and finishing the Walking Dead series. Wow. To be honest, I was actually going to update you earlier, but it was a race to the finish line, let me tell you. I spent so much time today reading this book, finishing it. I was gonna update you, but I actually started editing this video so that the second I was done with it, I can just literally press upload. And I was editing it and realizing that this was already going on for a very long time, so I decided not to update you that I'd started it and just go ahead and get it done, and we'll talk later. And later is now. I've completed this, and wow, what do I feel? I just love this series. I really love it so much. Like, you can't spend this much time with characters and in this world and just not come to love, you know, your friends at that point. Like, we really spend so much time with all of these characters. Like, look at these compendiums stacked on top of each other. Like, this is how much time we spend with these characters, and you just can't help but love them. And you know, it's funny because it's not a perfect series in a lot of ways, especially early on. There are things that can be improved, but what's really impressive is that they do actually improve. And especially thinking about the fourth one, and even as I've been thinking of my own criticism over the course of the season, like in the fourth one, more than any other, we get a lot of the women characters become leaders. We get a lot of LGBTQ plus representation. We get discussions of race that are pretty meaningful. Like, everything that I had earlier criticisms about, we really get those issues. I mean, obviously not perfectly resolved, but they make big strides in those later two books. It also brings into question things like, you know, toxic masculinity and good versus evil, but all the philosophical discussions that go along with that. And it's just such a good series. I've loved it so much. Without going into spoilers, I'm not going to give any spoilers, and I'll just say this. I don't know how I feel about the end of the Commonwealth arc. If you know, you know. I didn't hate it, but I don't think I was expecting that choice. I really don't. Overall, I'm happy with the place that this ended up, where our heroes leave off. It feels fitting. It feels rewarding. I noticed that there's like a note in the back from author Robert Kirkman, who talks about how difficult it was for him to decide the ending, and he actually, you know, thought about ending it in many different places. And as he grew along with the comics, he first had a much more bleak ending than what we ultimately get. And I definitely think this is the far better way to go. The ending that we actually get, I am really happy with. I mean, it's so hard, you know, when you write such a long series, what is the perfect ending? I'm not sure anybody really knows, but I'm happy with what we get here. And now just like looking at the series as a whole, oh my gosh, I can't even hold all of these in my hands because they are literally so large, but let me go through and give my brief ranking. Well, my favorite one by, I think, like a large margin would be Compendium 3. This is the one that I felt like the most emotionally like moved by. It was an easy 5 stars. I loved Walking Dead 3. And then the next one I would say would be the first one. I do think like I have a lot of problems with the character work in this book, but the action is so well done. It's so exciting. I love the prison setting. So this one, really solid. And of course, a great introduction. And then I would say the fourth one, I wish it was like more exciting, but I don't think that's necessarily true. It comes to the place it needs to come to, and I'm happy with it. I think I'd probably give this a 4 stars. I'd give 1 a 4 stars as well. And then lastly, 2, just because I am not a fan of the Alexandria arc, and that does take up so much of this book. So that is what it is. I still really fun though. I mean, I would still give this a 4 stars. So yes, the only thing is I do wish that Terminus would have actually been a thing, and Terminus is from the show. It's not from here. So there you go. Those are my rankings, and that's it. I've done it. I have completed the Walking Dead series, and I love it so much. Really, truly, I love this series with all my heart. And if you haven't read it, I'd say definitely give it a try. I had the best time. Thank you so much for watching and honestly, your patience as I've made through this process. It feels so rewarding to be at the end of this series, although of course I'm sad. I'm just gonna go watch the show now, honestly. That's the thing. I own these now and I can return to them whenever I want. And I probably will return to them in the future because I had a really great time. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, week, month, and the final end of 2023. I will see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye.